All right, everybody. Today I have another special guest with me. I have director Rob Sarkies, who is the director of the upcoming tragedy and drama Pike River, which tells the story of a mine explosion that has taken the lives of 29 miners and the two wives who stood up to a rather corrupt government to get justice. Rob, thank you very much for being with us here today.
You're so welcome. It's great to be here, all the way from New Zealand. Wellington, New Zealand is where I'm from. Is where I'm from, broadcasting from.
No, and take it from me. When I was given the privilege of seeing the film, I went into it completely blind, and first I'm just was a little caught off guard because I'm like, oh, there's accents here. It's that's clearly New Zealand, and plus, you have the likes of Melanie, that's her name, right? Who was in Heavenly Creatures and Over the Garden Wall, who did a brilliant job as Anna Osborne. But for me, I was not aware that this is actually based off of a real life tragedy that happened, not even what, a decade ago. So I guess my first question for you was, what was the development process like, either for you or for the production as a whole? As I know, for something like this, where facts and truth are such an integral part of not only the story's themes, but for the construction of a film like this itself.
There was a long process. We've been developing the film for 5+ years, and the development process initially involved talking to the families, really sort of asking them whether they wanted a film. I met with the families and said, look, I wanted to tell a story about their fight for justice because I felt that there was a compelling story to be told there, but I'd only do it with their permission and good grace. So, and if any of them wanted to talk to me to inform the screenplay for a film, please contact me. And many of them did. And so the process of developing the screenplay was really a long process of interviews with the families. And by interviews, I mean, half days, a full day, or multiple days in the case of Sonia and Anna. We then developed the screenplay and made the film. And while making the film, we included the families who wanted to be on set in that process. We often had Pike family members, standing with us, during, some intense scenes. They were there because they wanted to be there, and really, from my point of view, because we were dealing with a real story with obvious sensitivities around that story, because these people's loved ones passed away in this disaster. Spoiler alert, sorry. You needed to be, as a filmmaker, very sensitive to that, while also wanting to tell a compelling story. But this was a particular story that felt, where the truth felt compelling, so we didn't really need to make much up. We just needed to kind of filter the story down and figure out the timelines and decide what to include and what not to include, because it's also quite a complicated story, a fight for justice. And eventually we had a screenplay, and we were able to show it back to the families via, particularly Sonia and Anna, via a reading. We just got a bunch of actors in the room, and they read the screenplay to them, and you could tell from the response that they were very moved by the story. They'd never seen it like that before. Most of us don't have perspectives on our own stories. We live inside our own head. So what a crazy journey to have something intense like this happen, and then, then have a film made about it. I mean, I can only imagine what that was like. And in one of those read-throughs, Anna Osborne turned to me and said, to me and the writer actually, and said, "Rob, how did you know all that stuff?" because there's a lot of personal details in there. And we just said, Anna, you told us. And so I don't know. It's one of the pleasures of making a film that's based on truth is you're not just making a film, you're also sort of dealing with real people. And in this case, the real people were just fantastic.
No, and I sure hope they would be. I mean, they have every reason to not be at times because the actual tragedy of this is, you are right. It's a very nuanced sort of story, but the actual story, if you take a look at it from a broad stroke, it's a very deeply tragic set of circumstances that, I mean, they were fighting for years just to, I'd say spoilers, but this is something you can literally find on a news website. But they fought for years just to not only get answers, but just they wanted to bury their loved ones, and they literally couldn't. Now, we discussed about the details about, like you want to make sure you got everything right. There are things you can keep in, then of course there's things that you have to keep out. But that's all from a sort of development sort of process. You have the production design as well as the writing. But the tricky aspect that I want to know, because I'm guessing you had say on who got casted and who didn't, correct? Now, you can sometimes pull something like, their name eludes me, but you can pull like an actor that looks exactly one for one like the person they're portraying and get that sort of realism. Or you can pull what Danny Boyle did with Steve Jobs and just pull someone that looks nothing like them but can capture the essence. Now, I'm wondering, because at the end of the movie, they actually do kind of put side by sides of, the events in the movie and the events in real life. Some of the actors look like their characters one for one, while others, you can kind of tell there's some differences. When it came to casting the movie and getting the performances right, as well as capturing the essence of who these people are in real life, tell me about the process of not only casting the film, but also directing it, because you can't necessarily have your actors kind of, play willy-nilly with it. These are real people they actually have to portray.
Well, the initial process of casting the film, I mean, there's two processes really, because there's casting the leads, which is one thing, and right. We just thought, well, this is actually a really big, important New Zealand story. So we were able to attract New Zealand actors, and Melanie Linsky is based in the States, but she's also still very connected with New Zealand. She's very much a Kiwi. We were able to attract, really, like literally two or three, if you include Lucy Lawless, of our top female actors. Of the whole country's top female actors, and they were all perfect for these roles. they actually looked right, as well as were able to kind of capture the essence. So best of both worlds, I suppose. For the many other characters, there was a casting process, traditional casting process, and actually what I did in that was because it was initially self-tapes, I just asked all of the actors who were auditioning, who were all Kiwi actors who knew the story, of course, because it's a famous story in New Zealand, where were they, or what do they remember on the day that Pike River blew, which is the equivalent to asking an American the same question in relation to, say, 9/11, right?
Right.
And I asked them just to record this, right, and do this before they did their performance, before they did their audition, and it was quite amazing the effect that had, because for every single one of them, they immediately went into a place of memory, a place of reflection, a kind of a quiet but deeply felt place, and then they did the scene. And honestly, I had multiple choices for most of those characters, within a relatively small acting pool in New Zealand, because so many of those auditions resonated. Why? Because they came out of a truth. So that was my process. And then once we had auditioned, sorry, once we'd cast our actors, my simple process was, wherever possible, we did short rehearsals, but wherever possible, get them in a room or on a Zoom with the real person they're playing. Because, the actors read the script, they understand they understand the job, but you can understand that academically, or you can really feel it because you've sat on a Zoom or in a room for an hour, with the real Anna Osborne or the real Laurie Drew. So most of the kind of the lead performers went through that process, and really that meant that there was very little, traditional directing required on set. Mostly my aim was to allow these actors to experience what it must have felt like and be truthful to that experience, knowing who they were playing.
Wow. I mean, I can only figure, because at that point you essentially just try to, I'm guessing, get as few takes as possible. But when it comes to something like this, it really just kind of seems like, okay, set the camera up here and have full trust in your actors, which, if for those of you that have had the privilege of seeing the movie already, you know that a lot of the performances don't necessarily feel like acting. They feel more raw and real than anything. So and I did, like I said, I did a little research into this, and I do think the 9/11 comparison, while a little more hyperbolic in some cases, this is coming from an American, obviously, I will say the comparison is very much warranted in this case, because you check Reddit, or you check comments online, and you can tell, like, a lot of New Zealanders definitely felt like definitely felt this as a national tragedy. And, as a New Zealander yourself, I would normally ask, for any sort of filmmaker, what drew you to the story? Just as you would ask, something similar of your actors, like where were you? So I guess let me kind of flip the script here and try to ask you a two-for-one kind of question, which is, what drew you to make the film? And, I mean, then again, it's like, well, why would any American not want to make a movie about 9/11? It's something that was ingrained in our nation's history, in your nation's history. So take that, as well as, where were you when it happened, and how did you feel about it?
Well, I was. I'll I'll do the second question first.
All right.
I was actually making another film, so I was in pre-production on another film, a comedy actually, so very different. But the news was. I remember the feeling of the country, New Zealand, which is a small country, of course, holding its breath for a week while they waited to see whether these men would come out alive. One thing that the film doesn't say is that just before this mine blew up, 3 months before, was the Chilean mine event, which also had a movie made about it. But in that event, the men eventually got out. And so we New Zealanders, and it was a world story as well for a short time, just part of the news cycle, kind of hoped that the same thing would happen here, which is, I think, one of the reasons that the families were able to sort of be so sort of sucked in by the authorities who just fed them hope. So I thought Peter Whittle, who's really one of the antagonists in the film, as you know, and hopefully your audience will see, who's the executive of the Pike River Company. Like most New Zealanders, I thought he was a national hero just because of the way he presented himself in the media. And it was only much later when we all realised, which, as you have seen the film, you'll realize, Noah, that that actually the opposite is true. I believe he belongs in jail, or at least should be before a court. The second part of the question, what drew me to make it, is ultimately I found it an inspiring story, which probably sounds surprising because it is. It starts with a mine explosion, and yes, 29 men die, and yes, the families, of course, are devastated. But what it's really about is a fight for justice, is a fight for truth, and is a campaign from ordinary people that takes on the most powerful people in the country, right up to the Prime Minister. And I found that inspiring because in this case, that campaign had results. And that shows us that ordinary people can have an effect on big picture politics, on big business, on the justice system, and I feel like that's actually a universal story to tell, and an important story to tell right now at a time in the world where, I can only speak for myself, but I feel like a lot of people feel it. You just feel so disempowered because only if it's like almost, what's the point in protesting? Because it's all going up in flames anyway, and of course that's completely the wrong attitude. And Pike River shows that. If these families hadn't stood up and fought and blocked those gates and, put themselves on the line, then there'd be no hope of justice in the future. And right now, as I speak, we're waiting to see whether prosecutions for this event that happened 10 years ago are going to be announced. And we're very hopeful that the answer kind of will be yes. That happened because of these families. So that's inspiring to me. That's why I wanted to make the film.
And honestly, we talk about, what's inspiring, and I wholeheartedly agree, because it's the right, at least in America, it's the right of the people to voice their concerns and to keep those in power in check, checks and balances and whatnot. And I found myself deeply ingrained in the story because of that. It is a matter of these families, but mostly these two women who fight so hard, not necessarily for the truth. I mean, they do fight for the truth, but it's mainly a matter of taking a stance and basically saying, like you can't just use all this flowery language, feed us hope, and just assume we'll forget and have this whole thing wash over. Because ironically enough, you actually brought up, the Chilean mining accident, which happened just like 3 weeks or a couple of months before the Pike River. And it sure was probably on the news, but it just got washed over. It probably everywhere else. So of course, the whole thing just winds up becoming a who really gives a shit sort of idea. And I, as someone who lives in America where that is just so damn prevalent every day, I mean, for God's sakes, it's like, oh, there's a tragedy. No time to mourn. We got this other tragedy. No time to mourn. We got another tragedy. Who cares? Who gives a shit? So the idea that I think I took away from Pike River, at least more so than all the other wonderful themes that you and your team were able to craft, was sometimes you actually do need to hold on to that one story, like that one big thing, and say, hold on, we're not done talking about this. Like this needs to be discussed. We actually need to investigate this. We can't just let this become another story. And I admire the bravery of the two female leads. I'm sorry, their names befall me right now, but I admired their bravery because they were willing to actually say, hold on, where's the accountability? We actually need to talk about this, which in this day and age, I truly believe is a wonderful quality to have, because we should not let every story just slip through our fingers and focus on the next thing.
Yeah, but it took a lot, you know, like the Sonia Rockhouse character traits that we show in the movie, where she's like very media shy. If she was here and you were to meet her, she'd I've seen this. She gives younger people advice, and the advice is often take photos with your kids, because she was so sort of body aware, you know, concerned about her weight and how she looked and all of that, that she doesn't really have many photos of her children, of her with her children. She's got lots of photos of her kids, but not of her with her kids, including her son that died. And so it took a lot for that person who is media shy to the extreme, would turn the other way just if there's a camera at a wedding, right? It took a lot for her to become essentially sort of like a media personality. I mean, she now goes on the national news or national radio without even thinking about it really, and just opens her mouth and magic comes out, because she had to overcome that. It's like overcoming your deepest fear, overcoming your fear of spiders. But she had to do that in order to have a voice, in order to fight, you know. And to me, it's those. So, I mean, the big picture stuff is super interesting, but the sort of the human details of a story like this, what it takes to take on a fight against the powerful. I think that's what makes this kind of human, compelling, and probably more important than anything, relatable. You know, it might have happened in New Zealand 10 years ago. You're never going to meet these people if you're from America, but you can identify with them. You know, you can understand them because they're wives and mothers, and they have the same issues that many women have, actually, and found a way to overcome them.
And what I think is really interesting, that's because I was expecting you to actually say this phrase, which is, it's me today, it's you tomorrow. And in terms of the relatability aspects, I think that is deeply profound because, I mean, what was it? We had BP oil over the Gulf of Mexico, America, whatever it's called now. And so accountability, I think, is one of the best themes in this movie and one of the greatest lessons that we as average, old, everyday, normal people can really take from. We have a voice, and we're not just one single person. We have communities, we have friends, family, acquaintances. If we all come together and speak up, eventually you can't turn a blind eye. And you know, that's me on my soapbox. I apologize for that, but I do think that you and your team made a wonderfully profound movie that is as much of an art form as it is more about telling the truth. And oh, my apologies if there's sound leaking through. But I guess I have two more questions for you. One of which, actually circling back about when you heard about Pike River, you were making a comedy, and you know, comedy's one thing, and then you go from that to making something like this, which is a very grounded drama. Now, how does Pike River, a story like this, how does making a film like this differentiate from, saying, making a comedy? Because you are essentially doing a wholehearted genre switch.
You know, just made me think. I did drama when I was a kid at the local theatre. I spent a lot of time, spent all my school holidays doing drama, and they had a sign. It was the happy and sad face. You know, it's the classic kind of drama faces, faces of drama. One representing comedy, one representing tragedy, kind of up above the stage of kind of where I performed, and I was probably influenced by that. It's all the same stuff, would be my answer, Noah. I think that when you're making comedy, you're usually exploring something of the extremes of the tragedy of the human condition. You know, like the best comedy to me is where just everything goes wrong and your characters are trying to figure it out and stuffing it up, but you're actually exploring truths. And in fact, comedy is a great way to explore truths, because people don't feel preached at when you're making a comedy. They're laughing and then they kind of suddenly go, oh God, that's real. You know, you can really catch people off guard. And in tragedies like Pike River, I mean, I work really hard to not make it too heavy. You know, I won't pretend I mean, we understand the heaviness of the subject matter, but there are, you know, some quite surprising times in it where you'll find yourselves laughing. I've sat in audiences which, you know, at the premieres and things where there's a lot of laughter in some parts of the film because it's about a relationship. So in the end, I think it's all the same. Even though they're two very different genres. My interest is in exploring human emotion, I suppose, you know, exploring something about, you know, what it is to be human, what it is to be, you know, to live in this world. I also get bored, I guess. I don't want to just do one sort of thing, you know. I don't, you know, so my first film kind of is a bit of a cult classic in New Zealand. It's a sort of a student comedy. It's called Crime 101 in the States. Then my second film was a tragedy, and my third film was a comedy, and my fourth film now is a tragedy, and I've done a whole lot of sort of TV in between. You know, I mean, I guess I just like making movies, right? Whatever the genre.
Obviously,
should try horror next, right?
Obviously, and I would love to be able to. My normal last question would be if you were given a blank check, what would you make next? But essentially, we are all running a little shy on time. So I guess my final question would be a shortened version of that, which is, what genre would you like to tackle next?
I'm figuring that out, to be perfectly honest. You know, I don't. Certainly with true stories, I don't think you can. I love the true story medium, and so I'll probably stick with that, and that's the area which I'm currently exploring. I would actually like to tell a true story that goes beyond the New Zealand shores. You know, there's a lot of amazing stories that can be told, you know, all around the world, in America and beyond, and you know, and it's up to filmmakers, you know, like myself and many others to tell those stories, but also for studios and funders to, I guess, understand that there is an audience for these sorts of stories. You know, you spoke of genre before, and, you know, these days it's a lot easier to get a horror film financed than anything with the word drama before it. And I don't even completely understand that because, you know, that's not my genre. I don't turn on Netflix or go to the movies to watch a horror. I know others do, some others do. But I think there's a lot of people that want to see stories of real human beings, you know, stories that resonate. You know, these are the sorts of stories that are drama, you know, which is like, that's become a genre, but it's not really a genre. That's just stories about humanity. So yeah,
Right.
I'm looking for another deeply human story, and when it comes, I'll make it if I can get it funded.
Well, hopefully you can. I know the industry's in a bit of a rough spot right now, but honestly, I do think what people care for at the end of the day are very, very human stories. So with that, Rob, I appreciate you coming on the show today and talking about your film. For those of you watching, details for Pike River will be in the description below. Please feel free to check it out. It is well worth your time. And if you're a big history buff, it's a good bit of knowledge to, you know, spend your time in looking into. So with that, Mr. Sarkies, thank you very much for being on the show with us today.
You're so welcome, Noah. Great to chat.
No problem. Take care. See you on the next one.